Texas, summer 1944. The sun blazed across rangeland so vast it swallowed fear, burning down on wire fences and wooden guard towers, where German prisoners counted days in a language their captors couldn't speak. Among them, a 26-year-old woman named Lisa Brenner stood bareheaded in the dust, her hands trembling not from weakness, but from something she'd forgotten existed: possibility. She had expected cruelty. She had prepared for hatred. What she found instead was a cowboy named James Keller, who offered her the reins to his horse, and without knowing it, changed everything she believed about the enemy. May 1944. The war had already carved deep scars across Europe when Lisa Brenner found herself among the captured. Not a soldier, but something the American military didn't quite know what to do with a civilian worker attached to a medical unit in North Africa, swept up in the mass surrenders after the collapse of German positions. Women like her occupied a strange category. Not quite prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention, not quite innocent bystanders. Displaced, detained, uncertain. The transport ship rocked for 18 days across an Atlantic still prowling with submarines. Below decks, in compartments that smelled of salt and fear, Lisa shared space with 37 other women nurses, translators, secretaries who defollowed the German regime as promises into the desert and found themselves stranded when the Afrika Korps fell. They spoke little during the crossing. Words had become dangerous back home, and the habit of silence proved hard to break. Lisa kept a diary hidden in the lining of her only coat. The entries were sparse, careful. May 12th. The sea is gray. Someone is sick again. Nothing that could be used against her. Nothing that revealed the truth, that she'd begun to doubt the propaganda years before capture, that she'd seen things in the hospitals that made her question everything she'd been told about honor and sacrifice. The American guards treated them with professional distance. No violence, but no kindness either. Rations were adequate. The toilets worked. By comparison to what many German soldiers endured, it was humane. Still, the women moved through those 18 days like ghosts, uncertain what awaited them on the far shore. Land came as a shock of green and brown. The Texas coast shimmered in afternoon heat that reminded Lisa of North Africa, but everything else felt alien. The humidity pressed down like a wet blanket. The vegetation looked wrong mesquite and prickly pear instead of Mediterranean olive and cypress. When the guards herded them onto trains heading inland, the landscape transformed into something from the Western novels Lisa had read as a girl in Dresden. Endless sky, dust devils dancing across empty plains, cattle moving like slow clouds on the horizon. They said Americans lived like savages, whispered Greta Hoffman, a nurse from Munich who sat beside Lisa in the train car. This looks ... organized. Lisa pressed her face to the window. The train passed through small towns where people stopped to stare, not with hatred, but with curiosity. Children pointed. A woman hanging laundry paused mid-motion, a white sheet billowing in her hands. The scenes looked so ordinary, so domestic, that Lisa felt something crack inside her chest. These were supposed to be the enemy. They looked like people. The detention facility sat 15 miles outside a town called Brazoria, near enough to the coast that Lisa could sometimes smell the Gulf on the evening breeze. Not a traditional prisoner of war camp, the Geneva Convention hadn't quite prepared anyone for what to do with civilian women. Captured in war zones, but not a civilian internment center either. Something in between. Chain-linked fences topped with barbed wire. Guard towers with searchlights that swept the compound after dark. Wooden barracks painted white to reflect the merciless sun. Captain Marcus Webb, the camp commander, was a 48-year-old career officer from Massachusetts who'd spent most of the war dealing with logistics. He regarded his new charges with the same practical efficiency he applied to supply chains and transportation schedules. The women would be housed separately from the main POW population. They would receive standard rations. They would be assigned work details, kitchen duty, laundry, light agricultural labor to keep them occupied and contribute to their upkeep. They would be treated according to international law, which meant humanely, but not comfortably. "You'll find we're fair here," Webb told them through an interpreter during their first assembly. "Follow the rules, work when assigned, and you'll have no trouble. We're not in the business of making anyone suffer. But don't mistake fairness for softness. This is still detention. The barracks held 20 women each, with bunk beds and footlockers and windows covered with screens against mosquitoes. Lisa claimed the lower bunk near the door, a habit formed from years of wanting quick exits. That first night, she lay awake listening to women cry quietly into their pillows. Some mourned families they'd left behind. Others grieved for Germany itself, for the country they believed in that had crumbled into ash and accusation. Lisa grieved for something harder to name, the person she'd been before the war started, the girl who'd wanted to study literature at university, who'd believed the world was essentially good, who'd thought honor and truth were the same thing. The Texas heat settled over the camp like a physical presence. By mid-June, temperatures regularly climbed past 95 degrees. The women learned to move slowly during the afternoon hours, to seek shade wherever they could find it, to wet their handkerchiefs and drape them across the backs of their necks. The American guards seemed unbothered by heat that would have felled horses in Germany. They chewed tobacco and drank iced tea and laughed about how this was nothing compared to August. Work assignments came within a week. Lisa drew agricultural duty helping, tend the camp's vegetable gardens, and, unexpectedly, assisting at a nearby ranch that had contracted with the military to provide fresh meat and dairy products. The ranch needed extra hands. The war had drained the countryside of able-bodied men. The military needed to keep its detainees occupied. An arrangement was made. That was how Lisa Brenner met James Keller. The Keller Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of coastal prairie, not the massive operations like the King Ranch farther south, but substantial enough to support cattle, horses, and the 3 generations of Kellers who'd worked the land since the 1880s. James was the youngest son, 29 years old, with a face weathered beyond his years from sun and wind and the hard work of ranching. His older brother Tom was somewhere in France with Patton's Third Army. His father had died 2 years earlier, leaving James to manage the operation with hired help that grew scarcer every month. He stood 6 feet tall, lean as mesquite, with hands that bore permanent stains from rope and leather. When he spoke, it was sparingly, in a voice that carried the soft drawl of South Texas, tempered by a habit of thinking before words. He'd never traveled farther from Brazoria than San Antonio. The war existed for him mainly as absence Tom gone, ranch hands gone, the young women from town gone to factories in Houston and Galveston. The morning the truck arrived with 5 German women and an armed guard, James was mending fence near the main barn. He watched them climb down pale, thin, moving with the careful deliberation of people unsure of their welcome. The guard, a kid barely 20 named Private Dawson, looked more nervous than the prisoners. "Morning, Mr. Keller," Dawson called. "Captain Webb sent them to help with whatever you need. I'm to supervise." James set down his wire cutters and walked over, conscious of how the women tensed as he approached. One of them, blonde, with gray eyes that looked too old for her face, held his gaze longer than the others. Something in her expression wasn't fear exactly, more like careful assessment. A person trying to figure out what kind of man stood in front of her. "Any of you speak English?" James asked. The blonde woman nodded. "Some. I am Lisa Brenner. We work hard." "No trouble." Her accent turned the words into something musical and awkward at once. James pulled off his hat, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Reckon we can find plenty for willing hands. You know anything about gardens?" Lisa translated quickly for the others. Nods all around. Truth was, most of them knew as much about farming as James knew about opera, but desperation and good sense made everyone willing to learn. All right then. Private, they can work in the kitchen garden near the house. My mother'll show them what needs doing. I'll be checking cattle in the east pasture if you need me. He replaced his hat and turned back to his fence, aware of 5 pairs of eyes watching him go. Later, his mother would tell him that the women had stood frozen for a full minute after he left, as if waiting for the cruelty that never came. Rachel Keller was 62 years old and tougher than the boy-stark fence posts that lined her property. She'd raised 3 sons while her husband built a ranch from nothing but land and stubbornness. When she sized up the 5 German women standing uncertainly in her kitchen yard, she saw what she always saw in people, whether they were willing to work or looking for excuses. "Well," she said, hands on hips, "let's see what you're made of." The kitchen garden covered half an acre of rich soil, where Rachel grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, green beans, cucumbers, and melons. June meant weeding, watering, harvesting what was ready, training vines onto stakes. Back-breaking work under a sun that offered no mercy. Rachel watched the German women attack the tasks with desperate intensity, as if afraid that any pause might reveal weakness. Lisa worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to hide suffering. Her hands blistered within the first hour. The Texas sun burned the back of her neck, despite the cotton cloth Rachel had given her to cover it. Sweat soaked through her prison-issue dress until the fabric clung to her skin. But she didn't stop, didn't complain. Just worked with her head down until Rachel finally called a halt. "Sit," Rachel commanded, pointing to the shade of a massive live oak. "Drink this." She handed out tin cups of water, so cold it made teeth ache drawn from the deep well that served the ranch house. The women collapsed in the grass like marionettes with cut strings. For several minutes, the only sound was hard breathing and the buzz of cicadas in the tree above. Then Rachel brought out sandwiches, thick slices of homemade bread, with butter and cold beef, and watched silently as the women devoured them. "Thank you," Lisa said quietly in English. Then, because the words felt inadequate, "Danke schön, sehr, very kind." Rachel nodded. "Work hard. You eat well. That's the deal. Same as anyone who helps on this ranch." It was more kindness than Lisa had experienced in 2 years. Something in her throat tightened dangerously. She looked away, blinking hard against tears that would have been humiliating to shed. That afternoon, James rode in from checking cattle and found the women still working, slower now but steady. Private Dawson sat in the shade with a magazine, occasionally glancing up to make sure everyone stayed where they should. James dismounted near the garden fence, and his horse, a bay gelding named Copper, stretched his neck over the wire, curious about the newcomers. Lisa, weeding between tomato plants, looked up and found herself eye level with 1,000 pounds of horse. She went very still. The animal's breath was warm and grassy. His eyes were impossibly large and brown. "He won't hurt you," James said. "Just friendly." Lisa stood slowly, acutely aware that she hadn't been this close to a horse since childhood riding lessons in Dresden. A different life. A different world. She reached out carefully, let Copper sniff her hand. When he butted his head gently against her palm, requesting attention, something in her chest broke open. "Beautiful," she whispered. James watched her scratch Copper's forehead, saw the transformation in her face, the hardness softening into something approaching joy. "You ride?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "Long time ago, before everything." "Well," James settled his weight back on his heels. "Can't work a ranch proper without knowing horses. Maybe you'll learn while you're here." It was a casual comment, tossed out without thinking. But Lisa would remember it later as the moment when possibility returned to her life. The moment when the future became something other then an endless gray corridor of detention and waiting. The summer unwound like rope pulled through dusty hands. The German women came 3 times a week to work the Keller ranch, always under guard, always returning to Camp Brazoria before sunset. A routine developed. Rachel would assign tasks garden work, cleaning the chicken coop, helping with laundry when ranch hands' clothes piled up. James would nod acknowledgement from whatever corner of the 3,000 acres currently demanded his attention. But slowly, inevitably, the distance between guard and guarded began to blur. It happened in small ways first. Rachel teaching Lisa the English names for vegetables: zucchini, okra, black-eyed peas. James showing Greta Hoffman how to collect eggs without spooking the hens. Private Dawson relaxing his vigilance enough to share a cigarette with Elsa Koenig while she rested in the shade, talking about their hometowns, his in rural Arkansas, hers outside Hamburg. The women learned that Texas ranching operated on rhythms older than the war: seasons of planting and harvest, calving and cattle drives, brutal heat and brief rain. The land demanded everything and gave back grudgingly. Success meant reading the sky for weather, the grass for moisture, the cattle for signs of illness. Failure meant bankruptcy, starvation, loss of everything 3 generations had built. James fascinated Lisa in ways she couldn't quite articulate. He moved through the world with quiet competence, wasting no motion, speaking only what needed saying. When a fence post rotted through, he replaced it. When a water tank ran dry, he fixed the pump. When a calf got tangled in barbed wire, he cut it free with hands that were gentle despite their roughness. He seemed utterly certain of his place in the world, not arrogant, but settled, rooted. It was the opposite of everything Lisa had known for the past 5 years. The German regime had preached certainty, but underneath had been only chaos and fear. James's certainty came from different soil, from knowing his grandfather had cleared this land. His father had built these fences. His brother was fighting so that this life could continue. It was certainty born of tradition and work, not ideology. "Why you not in the army?" Lisa asked him one afternoon in late July. They were in the barn, James sorting tack that needed repair, Lisa sweeping the floor. Private Dawson had walked to the house with Rachel, trusting that 2 unarmed Germans weren't going anywhere without their fellow prisoners. James looked up from examining a bridle. Ranching's essential work. Somebody's got to produce food for the war effort. Plus my brother's over there. They don't take both sons if one's already serving. Though Tom would say I got the easy end of the deal. He paused. "You don't have to call me Mr. Keller. Name's James." "James," Lisa repeated, testing the pronunciation. "Your mother, she is hard woman, but kind. She's a rancher's wife. Has to be hard to survive it. My father died working himself into the ground. She won't let that happen to me if she can help it." He set down the bridle. "Can I ask you something?" Lisa nodded, wary. "How'd you end up with the German army? You don't seem like ... He struggled for words. "Like the kind of person who'd volunteer for what your country was doing." The question landed like a stone in still water. Lisa set down the broom, chose words carefully. "In Germany, you not always have choice. I work in hospital translator. Languages, they are. I am good with languages. The government, they say this is your duty. You say no, bad things happen. You say yes, bad things happen anyway, but slower. You believe in it? What your country was doing." "No." The word came out fierce, almost angry. "Not for long time, but believing or not believing, it doesn't matter. The machine, it moves. You move with it or it crushes you. I am coward. I move with it." James picked up a piece of leather, turned it over in his hands. "Don't think being trapped makes you a coward. Think it makes you human." Lisa felt something crack behind her eyes. She turned away, pretending to examine the wall. "Your brother, he is safe?" "Last letter said so. That was 3 weeks ago. You never know, really. Just have to trust. Trust in what? That God's paying attention. That good people make it through. That this ends someday and we all get to go back to our regular lives, he shrugged. Maybe that's stupid. No, Lisa said quietly. Is not stupid, is necessary. Without trust, we are all lost. August brought heat that bent the air into liquid mirrors above the ground. The ranch work slowed during the worst afternoon hours. Even cattle sought shade, standing motionless under scattered trees, too hot to move. James took to working early mornings and evenings, leaving midday for paperwork and equipment maintenance. One morning, he found Lisa standing at the corral fence, watching the horses. She came every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday now, always arriving with the same mixture of resignation and hunger on her face, resignation to confinement, hunger for something she couldn't quite name. Want to learn to ride? James asked. Lisa spun, startled. What? To ride? Horses. You said you used to, back in Germany. Could teach you again. Ranch horses are different from those fancy European saddle horses, but principles are the same. Lisa glanced toward the house where Private Dawson sat with Rachel, drinking coffee. I am. I do not think this is allowed. Didn't ask if it was allowed. Asked if you want to. The hunger in Lisa's expression intensified. She looked at the horses, back at James, weighing risk against desire. Slowly, she nodded. James saddled Copper and a gentle mare named Daisy, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been doing this since he could walk. He led both horses to the small training pen behind the barn, out of sight of the house. Technically, this was probably against some regulation James hadn't bothered learning. Practically, what harm could one German woman do on a horse inside a fenced pen? Put your left foot in the stirrup, James instructed. Grab the saddle horn. Swing your right leg over. Lisa's first attempt ended with her hopping awkwardly beside the horse. Her second got her halfway up before she lost momentum and slid back down. James suppressed a smile. Here, he cupped his hands. Step in. I'll give you a boost. For a moment, Lisa hesitated. Physical contact with guards was forbidden at the camp. But this wasn't the camp, and James wasn't a guard. She placed her worn boot in his linked hands, felt him lift with easy strength, and suddenly she was up, settling into the saddle with Daisy shifting patiently beneath her. The world looked different from horseback. Bigger, more open. Lisa gripped the saddle horn with both hands, heart hammering. Relax, James said, his hand on Daisy's neck. She can feel when you're tense. Makes her nervous, too. Just breathe. Get your balance. Lisa forced her shoulders to drop, her breathing to slow. Beneath her, Daisy stood rock steady, ears swiveling lazily. Gradually, the terror subsided into something approaching excitement. James spent the next hour teaching her or reteaching her the basics. How to hold the reins. How to use leg pressure to communicate. How to sit the horse's walk without bouncing like a sack of grain. He spoke quietly, correcting without criticism, demonstrating when words failed. Daisy, bless her gentle soul, tolerated the amateur rider with patience that suggested she'd done this before. By the time Private Dawson wandered around the barn looking for his charges, Lisa had successfully walked. Daisy, in circles around the pen, stopped and started on command and was grinning with an expression that made her look 10 years younger. What's all this? Dawson asked, though his tone suggested curiosity rather than alarm. Teaching her to ride, James said simply. Might need her to help move cattle someday. Can't do that on foot. It was a flimsy excuse, and everyone knew it. But Dawson, who'd watched these women work themselves raw in the Texas heat, who'd shared cigarettes and learned their names and heard them cry at night in their barracks, just nodded. Captain Webb asks, that's your story. It's the truth, James said. Which it was, technically, though the full truth was more complicated. Lisa dismounted with James's help, her legs shaky from unfamiliar exertion. She stroked Daisy's neck, whispering German words James didn't understand. When she turned to him, her eyes were bright. "Thank you," she said. "I forget what it feels to be human. Not prisoner, just ... person." James cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. "Well, you do good work here. Least I can do." But it wasn't the least he could do. It was more than he owed any prisoner, German or otherwise. And they both knew it. The writing lessons became routine, stolen moments in early morning or late evening when supervision loosened and opportunity allowed. Lisa learned quickly, muscle memory from childhood combining with desperate hunger to reclaim a piece of herself that war and detention had stripped away. Within 3 weeks, she could handle Daisy at a trot. Within 6, James had her helping move small groups of cattle from one pasture to another. Private Dawson looked the other way. Rachel pretended not to notice. The other German women watched with a mixture of envy and hope. If Lisa could find this small freedom, maybe they could too. The camp held weekly assemblies where Captain Webb delivered updates on the war. By September, news from Europe had turned decisively against the German regime. Paris liberated. The German forces retreating on all fronts. American and British troops pushing toward the German border. In the barracks, the women stopped speaking about going home. Home was becoming a place that might not exist anymore, or at least not in any form they'd recognize. Lisa wrote less in her hidden diary. The words felt pointless, recording days that blurred into sameness. Work, eat, sleep, wait, except for the days at the ranch, which she marked with small stars in the margin. Those days felt real. One evening in late September, James found her standing alone near the horse corral, staring at the sunset. The sky had gone orange and purple, dramatic as a stage set. In that light, Lisa looked less like a prisoner and more like someone lost far from home. "You all right?" James asked. Lisa didn't turn. "Captain Webb, he tells us Germany is falling. My city, Dresden, they say it is still standing, but maybe not for long. My family, I do not know if they are alive. I am here, safe, eating well, learning to ride horses while my country burns." Her voice stayed flat, carefully controlled. "I should feel guilty. Do you?" "No. I feel relief. Then guilt about the relief. Then anger at the guilt. Then ... She gestured helplessly. "Nothing. I feel nothing." James leaned against the fence beside her. "My brother Tom sent me a letter last month. Only got it 2 days ago, mail's slow. He was in France. Said he'd seen things he couldn't write about. Said he understood now why we were fighting, but also said he'd never be the same person who left Texas. Said he was sorry for that, like it was something he'd done wrong." "What did you write back?" "That coming home changed was better than not coming home at all. That whatever he'd seen or done, he was still my brother. That he had a place here where people knew him and would help him remember who he was." James paused. "Figured you might need to hear something similar." Lisa turned to look at him finally. "I am enemy. You're a person who got caught in something bigger than yourself. Same as Tom. Same as all of us, really. War does that makes people into things they're not. Enemies. Heroes. Victims. But underneath, we all just trying to survive, and maybe hold on to pieces of who we were before everything went to hell. You are good man. James Keller. Just a rancher who needs help moving cattle." But he smiled when he said it. Lisa moved closer, closing the distance between them until they stood shoulder to shoulder against the fence. The sunset deepened into twilight. Somewhere a coyote called, long and mournful. The horses shifted in their pen, dark shapes against the gathering night. "If I am still here when the war ends," Lisa said quietly, "if they do not send us back immediately, may I stay working on the ranch?" James didn't answer immediately. The question carried implications that went beyond labor and wages. When he spoke, his voice was careful. If you're still here, and you want to stay, there'll be work. Ranch always needs good hands. It wasn't a promise exactly, but it wasn't a refusal either. In the space between, something neither of them could name began to take root. The war continued its grinding conclusion through the fall and into winter. By December, German forces were in full retreat on all fronts. Allied bombers darkened European skies daily. At Camp Brazoria, the detained women existed in strange limbo, not quite prisoners now that Germany's defeat seemed inevitable, not quite free to imagine what came next. The ranch work continued. Rachel increased the frequency of the women's visits, claiming she needed extra hands for winter preparations. Captain Webb approved the request with a look that suggested he knew what she was really doing, keeping displaced people occupied, and purposeful during a season when despair could turn deadly, but saw no reason to object. James taught Lisa to repair tack, mend fences, doctor sick cattle. Skills she'd never imagined needing became the framework of her days. Her hands developed calluses. Her skin darkened despite the weaker winter sun. The prison pallor faded, replaced by something that looked like health. They worked side by side often now, with minimal supervision. Private Dawson had been reassigned to guard duty at the main camp, replaced by a rotating series of older soldiers who seemed more interested in staying warm than enforcing regulations. The rules, such as they were, had relaxed. No one was planning escape attempts with the war nearly over. No one wanted to be anywhere except exactly where they were, alive, fed, waiting for whatever came next. In January, Dresden burned. Lisa heard about it 3 days after the bombing, when Captain Webb called a special assembly to inform the German detainees that their city had been destroyed. The details were sparse, sanitized. A major military target, significant damage, civilian casualties. The war would be over soon. Lisa received the news standing at attention among the other women, her face frozen in the blank expression she'd perfected over years of hiding reactions. She didn't cry until that night, alone in her bunk, and even then she did it silently, pressing her face into her thin pillow so no one would hear. The next day, she went to work at the ranch. James knew without asking. Something in the way she moved, the careful precision of someone holding themselves together by will alone. He gave her hard physical labor mucking stalls, hauling feed bags, splitting firewood, the kind of work that exhausted body and numbed mind. At noon, when Rachel called them in for lunch, Lisa finally broke. She sat at the kitchen table with a sandwich in front of her, and her hands simply stopped working, just froze in midair, reaching for food she couldn't make herself take. Rachel looked at James. James looked at Lisa. Then he stood, walked around the table, and put one hand on Lisa's shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. He led her outside, past the barn, to a grove of live oaks that marked the old property line. There, hidden from the house, he let her collapse against a tree trunk and cry in great shuddering gasps that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than lungs. James didn't try to comfort her with words. Didn't tell her it would be all right, because maybe it wouldn't. Instead, he sat down beside her in the dirt and just stayed there, solid, present, real. When Lisa could breathe again, she said, "My sister." Her name was Anna. She lived in Dresden. 3 children. She wrote me letters before I was captured, about ordinary things, what they had for dinner, what the children learned in school, how the air raid sirens were becoming part of their daily routine, like church bells. She wiped her face roughly. I do not know if she evacuated. I do not know if she lived. I will never know. I'm sorry, James said. Everyone is sorry. The whole world is sorry. But sorry does not bring back cities, does not bring back sisters, does not make any of this mean something. She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Why you are kind to me? I am German. We started this war. We did terrible things. You should hate me. Can't hate you for being born in a place. Can't hate you for things other people did. Can only deal with who you are right now, sitting here beside me. And the person you are? She works hard, shows up, doesn't quit. That's who I see. Lisa pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. You are a good man. I say this before. I will say it again until you believe it. Just a rancher. No, a good man. The distinction mattered to her in ways James couldn't fully grasp, but he let it stand. Hash, 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 Spring-Thaw, Germany, surrendered on May 8, 1945. At Camp Brazoria, the news arrived mid-afternoon, shouted from the guard towers and spreading through the barracks like wind through grass. The detained women gathered in the yard, uncertain how to react. Some cried, some prayed. Most just stood in shocked silence, processing the fact that the war, the years-long nightmare that had devoured their country and scattered them across the globe, was finally over. Lisa sat on her bunk and wrote in her diary, May 8th, the war has ended. I am still alive. I do not know what happens now. The days that followed brought bureaucratic chaos. The military had procedures for handling prisoners of war, but those procedures had been written with the assumption that wars ended with clear victors who returned home, triumphant, and clear losers who returned home defeated. No one had quite planned for the scenario where home was a smoldering ruin with no functional government and millions displaced. Repatriation would take months, Captain Webb informed them. The transport infrastructure in Europe was destroyed. The American military was focused on occupying Germany and hunting war criminals. Civilians like them ranked low on the priority list. They could expect to remain at Camp Brazoria through the summer at minimum, possibly longer. What do we do until then? Someone asked. Webb shrugged. Same as you've been doing. Work details, routine. The ranch contracts will continue. Anyone who wants to volunteer for paid labor in town can apply. The war may be over, but the labor shortage isn't. The answer was unsatisfying, but pragmatic. So life continued in its strange new rhythm. No longer wartime, not yet peacetime, but something suspended between. Lisa went to the ranch the day after Germany's surrender and found James repairing the windmill near the east pasture. She stood watching him work for several minutes before he noticed her. Didn't expect you today, he said, climbing down from the tower. Where else would I go? It was a simple question with complicated answers. Lisa had nowhere else to go. No home to return to. No family she could contact. No country that felt like hers anymore. The ranch had become the only place that felt real. James pulled off his gloves, studied her face. You scared? Of what comes next? Yes. Of today? No. She gestured at the windmill, the cattle, the endless sky. Here, I know what I'm doing. I know who I am. Out there, ... double quotes, she trailed off. You're staying then? Through the summer? If they allow it. If you want help. Always want help. Ranching's not a one-person job. James paused, seemed to wrestle with words. Truth is, I'd miss having you around. Got used to you being here. It was as close to a declaration as James Keller could manage. Lisa felt her breath catch. I got used to being here, she said quietly. They stood in the warm May sunshine, surrounded by 3,000 acres of Texas prairie, and let the unspoken thing between them finally surface. Not love exactly. That word seemed too simple for what they'd built. More like recognition. Two people who found in each other something war and distance and ideology couldn't erase. The stubborn human need to connect, to trust, to believe that kindness mattered even when the world was burning. By July, the repatriation schedules were posted. The women of Camp Brazoria would return to Germany in groups, processed through military checkpoints and displaced person centers, eventually settling wherever they could find family or work or shelter. Lisa's group was scheduled for mid-August. She received the news and felt nothing except a vague sense of unreality. Return to what? Dresden was rubble. Her family was scattered or dead. The country she'd left no longer existed in any meaningful form. She spent her last weeks at the ranch, working with fierce intensity, as if she could somehow imprint this place onto her bones. James taught her to castrate cows, a brutal education that left her shaking but proud. Rachel taught her to make biscuits, sharing a kitchen skill that felt like an inheritance. The horses nickered when they saw her coming, associating her with grain and gentle hands. One evening in early August, 2 weeks before her departure, James asked her to ride out with him to check the north fence line. They rode in comfortable silence, letting the horses pick their way through mesquite and prickly pear. The sun hung low, painting everything gold. When they reached the fence, James dismounted and pretended to examine posts that didn't need examining. Lisa sat on Daisy, watching him, waiting for whatever he was building the courage to say. "I talked to a lawyer in Brazoria," James said finally, not looking at her, "about the process for bringing someone over from Europe after repatriation. If they wanted to come back." Lisa's heart began to hammer. "Why would you do this?" "Because I'm no good at pretty words. Because I don't know how to say what I mean, except by doing things." He turned to face her. "You go back to Germany, because that's what they're making you do. But if you wanted to come back here after not as a prisoner, as a person, there might be ways to do that. Work visa, eventually permanent residency, if ... double quote," he faltered. "If what?" "If you found a reason to stay permanent." The gold light turned his face into something from a painting. Lisa slid off Daisy's back, let the reins drop, walked to where James stood. "You are asking me to come back. I'm telling you there's a place here if you want it. A job. A home. People who ... double quotes." He swallowed hard. "Who would miss you if you didn't?" Lisa reached out, took his hand. His palm was rough and warm. "James Keller, I have been prisoner for over a year. In all that time, the only place I felt free was here. With you, teaching me to ride, showing me how to mend things that break, treating me like I am person worth knowing." She squeezed his fingers. "Yes, I will come back. I will find a way. It won't be easy. Paperwork takes forever. Immigration's a mess. And people might not understand a German woman coming back after everything. I don't care about easy. I care about possible. You show me it is possible." James pulled her close then, an awkward embrace that settled into something solid and sure. They stood that way while the sun descended and the cattle moved slowly toward water, and the Texas prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and unforgiving and beautiful. "I'll wait," James said into her hair. "However long it takes." "I'll wait. And I will come back," Lisa promised. "To this place?" "To you." Lisa Brenner left Texas on August 17, 1945, processed through a military transport system designed for efficiency over compassion. She spent 3 months in a displaced persons camp in Belgium, another 2 in temporary housing in what remained of Hamburg. She filed paperwork. She waited. She wrote letters to an address in Brazoria, Texas, and received letters back stilted, formal things that communicated longing in careful language that wouldn't alarm censors. In April 1946, 9 months after leaving, Lisa Brenner stepped off a train in Brazoria, carrying 1 suitcase and a work visa sponsored by Keller Ranch. James met her at the station, hat in hand, looking older and more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "You came back," he said, as if he doubted despite the letters. "I promised." They married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony that scandalized some of the town and surprised no one who knew them. Rachel stood as witness, her face set in an expression that dared anyone to object. No one did. Lisa worked the ranch alongside James for 47 years. She never lost her accent, but she mastered the language and the land. When Tom Keller returned from Europe, changed and silent, she helped him remember how to laugh. When Rachel died in 1958, Lisa inherited her kitchen and her role as the ranch's heart. When James's arthritis finally forced him to hire younger hands, Lisa interviewed and selected them, seeing in new workers the same desperate need for purpose she'd once carried. They had no children. The war had taken that possibility from Lisa, along with so much else. But they raised cattle, horses, and a way of life that honored work, land, and the stubborn human capacity to rebuild. Lisa Brenner Keller died in 1992, 2 years after James. She was buried under the live oaks where she'd wept for Dresden. On land she de-learned to love, because a cowboy taught her that enemies could become people, and people could become family. Her diary, discovered years later by researchers studying the Texas POW camps, contained one final entry, dated August 16, 1945, the night before her departure. Tomorrow I leave this place that has been prison and home, cage and sanctuary. I do not know what comes next, but I have learned this, that even in war, kindness finds a way, that even between enemies, understanding can bloom, that a man can show you your own humanity by treating you as if it never left. I am going back to Germany. But Texas, this red dirt, this impossible sky, this cowboy who gave me back my heart, Texas will always be the place I chose, the place that chose me.